9 Golden Age stars who died during surgery. They conquered the silver screen. They commanded millions of adoring fans. They seemed untouchable, immortal, larger than life. Then they died on an operating table, just like anybody else. Hollywood's Golden Age stars appeared invincible on screen. They faced down villains, survived wars, and overcame impossible odds week after week in darkened theaters across America. But behind the glamour and spotlights lurked a brutal truth. These icons bled the same red blood as everyone else. We don't like thinking about our screen idols on operating tables, says Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, who studied celebrity medical deaths for years. There's something deeply disturbing about stars dying during procedures designed to heal or enhance. These deaths force us to confront the reality that even extraordinary talents face the same medical risks as ordinary people. What makes these surgical deaths so compelling isn't just their shock value. They reveal the dark underbelly of stardom itself, the desperate attempts to maintain youth and beauty, the VIP treatment that sometimes did more harm than good, and the collision between Hollywood fantasy and cold medical reality. When a star dies on the operating table, we're witnessing more than just bad luck, explains entertainment historian Margaret Collins. We're seeing Hollywood's demand for physical perfection crash headlong into medical limitations. The industry's denial of aging and mortality finally losing its biggest battle. Today we're pulling back the curtain on 9 of Golden Age Hollywood's most shocking surgical deaths. Some died during routine procedures gone catastrophically wrong. Others gambled everything on desperate cosmetic surgeries. A few simply ran out of luck at the worst possible moment. Their stories reveal not just how these beloved performers died, but how the relentless pressure of stardom may have pushed them onto those operating tables in the first place.
Since the war, the Treasury Department has continued selling E-bonds. And a lot of us have continued buying them. They're priced so that anyone...
The unnecessary operation, Jeff Chandler. Jeff Chandler had it all. The rugged good looks, the distinctive silver hair that made him stand out in a sea of leading men, and a career that was still going strong in 1961. With his towering 6-foot 4-inch frame and resonant voice, Chandler projected strength and reliability in everything from westerns to war dramas. Universal Pictures considered him one of their most bankable assets. Then he died because someone cut the wrong thing during a routine operation. Died in 1961, age 42, says medical historian Dr. Robert Stevens. Chandler's case is textbook medical error, a straightforward procedure turning fatal through a preventable mistake. The trouble began innocently enough. Chandler injured his back playing baseball, the kind of minor mishap that happens to weekend warriors everywhere. When conservative treatment didn't work, doctors recommended surgery for a herniated disc. No big deal. Thousands of people had similar operations every year without incident. Went in for routine back surgery after an injury, Stevens explains. This was a well-established procedure by 1961, with predictable outcomes and manageable risks. Given Chandler's overall good health, there was absolutely no reason to expect complications. What happened next wasn't just a complication, it was a catastrophe. An artery was accidentally cut, leading to massive internal bleeding, Stevens says. The surgeon nicked Chandler's artery during the procedure. While bleeding risks exist in any surgery, this particular error appears to have been pure technique failure rather than unavoidable circumstance. The surgical team controlled the immediate bleeding, but the damage had been done. Chandler developed complications including infection that his body, weakened by blood loss and surgical trauma, couldn't fight off. Despite receiving the best care money could buy at a top medical facility, his condition steadily deteriorated over several weeks. Died weeks later from complications, but many say he never should have been operated on in that condition, notes Stevens. Some medical experts who reviewed the case questioned whether Chandler's back problem warranted surgery at all. More conservative approaches might have resolved it without the risks of operation. This raises troubling questions about celebrity medical care. Was Chandler rushed into surgery because he was a valuable star who needed to get back to work quickly? Did his VIP status actually harm rather than help him, pushing doctors toward aggressive intervention instead of patience? Chandler's death at just 42 devastated Universal Studios, which had invested heavily in his career. His final film, Merrill's Marauders, was released posthumously in 1962, creating the eerie experience of audiences watching a recently deceased actor fighting for survival on screen. Hollywood lost one of its great leading men to a surgical error. The cruel irony is that Chandler, who routinely performed heroic feats in his films, was undone by something as mundane as a back operation that thousands of ordinary Americans survived every year.
Saying something?
Yes, the typewriter.
Oh, you're a little stenographer.
Yes, I'm a little stenographer.
That's fascinating.
The rumored vanity, Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford built her entire career on control, controlling her image, controlling her performances, and most of all, controlling the aging process. From flapper to shoulder-padded career woman to horror queen, Crawford maintained iron-fisted discipline over her appearance through rigorous beauty routines, strategic lighting, and sheer force of will. So persistent rumors that Hollywood's ultimate image-obsessed star died during a secret cosmetic procedure seem almost too on-brand to dismiss. Though officially listed as dying from a heart attack in 1977, some biographers claim she was undergoing a secret cosmetic procedure at the time, says celebrity biographer Thomas Henderson. The official record states Crawford died at home from a heart attack discovered by her housekeeper, but alternative accounts have circulated since shortly after her death, suggesting she was receiving unauthorized in-home treatments to maintain her appearance. These rumors fit perfectly with Crawford's legendary obsession with her looks. This was a woman who reportedly placed her face in ice water every morning, scrubbed her skin raw with lemon juice, and underwent painful dental procedures to accentuate her cheekbones. The idea that she might seek questionable cosmetic treatments, even at 73, sounds entirely consistent with her character. No hospital records were ever publicly released, Henderson continues. This absence of medical documentation has fueled speculation, though it's equally consistent with both a natural death at home and with a clandestine cosmetic procedure gone wrong. We simply don't have conclusive evidence either way. What makes these rumors persist isn't just Hollywood gossip, it's our deep cultural understanding of who Joan Crawford was. A woman who once said, "I never go outside unless I look like Joan Crawford the movie star." Her entire identity was built around maintaining her appearance at any cost. The suggestion that she died in pursuit of that goal feels like narrative completion rather than scandal. Throughout her career, Crawford had demonstrated willingness to endure significant physical discomfort for beauty. From reportedly harsh skincare regimens to painful fashion choices, she embodied the principle of suffering for appearance long before modern celebrities made it common practice. She kept her image perfect, right up until the end. This captures both Crawford's lifelong dedication to appearance and the poignant possibility that this same commitment might have contributed to her death. If the rumors contain any truth, Crawford's passing represents Hollywood's beauty demands claiming their ultimate price. The star who built her career on perfect presentation, dying while trying to maintain that very illusion. What makes Crawford's case particularly telling is how it illuminates the unique pressures facing aging female stars during Hollywood's golden age. While men could age naturally on screen and even gain gravitas with gray hair and wrinkles, women faced career extinction at the first signs of physical decline. For stars like Crawford, who had built identities entirely around carefully managed appearance, visible aging wasn't just personal vanity but existential professional threat. Whether Crawford died naturally at home as officially recorded or during unauthorized cosmetic procedures as rumors suggest, the ambiguity creates a fitting final chapter for a star whose carefully maintained public image always contained elements of strategic fiction.
Start dishing out a little action, and I'm tough and temperamental. They say, let them say, I'm just a simple business girl.
The delayed complication, Jane Russell. Jane Russell was Hollywood's original bombshell, the voluptuous brunette whose curves were so famous that Howard Hughes designed a special bra just to showcase them. From her controversial debut in The Outlaw to her partnership with Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Russell's physical attributes were central to her star power. Unlike many Golden Age stars who died young, Russell lived to 89, experiencing both the heights of Hollywood fame and the long aftermath when the spotlight moves on. Her 2011 death following surgical complications represents not youthful tragedy, but the more common reality of medical intervention in later life. Died in 2011 at age 89, notes medical historian Dr. Robert Stevens. Russell's case is completely different from more sensational Hollywood surgical deaths. She lived a full lifespan and needed the kind of operation that's common for patients in their late 80s, rather than some risky vanity procedure. Russell's final surgery reflected genuine medical necessity rather than questionable judgment. As an elderly patient with respiratory issues, she underwent appropriate surgical intervention for legitimate health concerns, not appearance enhancement. Had undergone lung surgery days before her death, Stevens explains. This procedure was medically necessary and performed with appropriate protocols for someone her age. The operation itself appears to have been successful, but as with many elderly patients, the recovery process introduced complications that her body couldn't overcome. These complications, respiratory failure, difficulty recovering from anesthesia, reduced healing capacity, are common risks for any patient in their late 80s undergoing major surgery. While technically connected to her operation, Russell's death reflects the reality of medical intervention at advanced age rather than error or misadventure. Died from respiratory failure, possibly triggered by post-op complications, says Stevens. This represents a common trajectory for elderly surgical patients. Technically successful operation followed by complications during recovery when the body's diminished reserves and healing capacity become critical factors. Russell's case illuminates a different aspect of celebrity medical care than more sensational surgical deaths: the reality that even the most privileged access to health care cannot overcome the fundamental limitations of human biology, particularly in advanced age. Despite financial resources and presumably excellent medical attention, Russell ultimately faced the same challenges as any patient her age undergoing similar procedures. She survived Hollywood, but couldn't survive the hospital. This captures both Russell's remarkable longevity in an industry notorious for shortened lives and the ultimate mortality that claims even those who navigate fame's many hazards successfully. What makes Russell's case particularly noteworthy is how it contrasts with her highly sexualized public image. The body, once famous primarily for its curves, eventually experienced the same medical realities as any aging person. The star, whose physical attributes had been so commodified in youth, ultimately faced the same vulnerabilities as any other 89-year-old, regardless of past fame or privilege. Russell's surgical death represents not scandal, but the universal human journey from youth to age, from physical prime to inevitable decline, a journey that fame might complicate, but cannot fundamentally alter.
Let me finish, Charlie, because I want to tell you this. If that's the way people are, I'd rather be right smack underneath the bullseye when it drops and get it over with.
The desperate reconstruction. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's Hollywood story is among the industry's most tragic. A meteoric rise followed by one of the most devastating falls in entertainment history. Her journey from promising starlet to tabloid fixture and eventually to prostitution and homelessness reveals Hollywood's capacity to discard those who fail to navigate its treacherous social dynamics. Payton's death at 39, reportedly during reconstructive surgery, serves as the final cruel chapter in a cautionary tale about an industry that treats people as disposable commodities. Died in 1967, age 39, notes entertainment historian Margaret Collins. Payton's official cause of death was heart and liver failure, reflecting years of substance abuse after her Hollywood exile. But this clinical description doesn't capture the desperate circumstances of her final moments. Payton's career began with genuine promise in the late 1940s. Her striking blonde beauty and natural screen presence earned her contracts at major studios. Her performance opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, 1950, demonstrated legitimate talent that might have sustained a significant career under different circumstances. Her downfall began with personal scandals, particularly a love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal that culminated in a physical altercation, leaving Tone hospitalized with serious injuries. This tabloid drama, combined with Payton's reputation for difficult behavior and excessive drinking, transformed her from rising star to industry pariah almost overnight. By the mid-1950s, Payton's film career had effectively ended, beginning a downward spiral that included bankruptcy, arrests for prostitution, and periods of homelessness. Years of alcohol and drug abuse destroyed both her health and the beauty that had briefly made her valuable to Hollywood. Official cause: heart and liver failure, Collins continues. This medical determination reflects the cumulative damage from years of substance abuse. However, people close to Payton tell a more specific story about her death, that she collapsed during surgery aimed at reconstructing her appearance after years of decline. According to these accounts, Peyton had secured financial help from a former associate to undergo reconstructive surgery, a desperate attempt to restore some approximation of the looks that had briefly made her a Hollywood commodity. The procedure, allegedly performed under less than optimal circumstances given her limited resources, proved more than her damaged body could withstand. But friends say she collapsed mid-reconstructive surgery related to years of drug and alcohol abuse, notes Collins. This suggests Peyton's compromised cardiovascular system couldn't handle the stress of anesthesia and surgical intervention. If true, it means she died during a final attempt to reclaim the very asset, her appearance, that Hollywood had initially valued and then discarded. This frames Peyton's surgical death as the final exploitation in a career defined by the industry's extraction of value from her physical appearance without concern for her development as either artist or human being. Having briefly profited from her beauty before discarding her when scandals threatened marketability, Hollywood's machinery created circumstances where Peyton's final act became a desperate attempt to recapture the only attribute the industry had ever truly valued. The industry chewed her up. The scalpel finished the job. This captures the tragic continuity between Peyton's treatment by Hollywood and her final moments. Her death during reconstructive surgery, representing the logical conclusion of an industry relationship built entirely on exploiting her appearance without regard for her humanity. Peyton's story illuminates the particularly vulnerable position of women in Golden Age Hollywood. The narrow window for acceptable behavior, the double standards regarding personal conduct, and the almost exclusive focus on physical appearance rather than talent development. If accounts of her surgical death are accurate, Peyton's final moments represent perhaps the most literal example of Hollywood's beauty demands claiming their ultimate price. A former star dying during a procedure aimed at restoring the very attribute that had briefly made her valuable to an industry that discarded her.
And I agree, we all agree together.
The brutal aftermath, Ramon Novarro. Ramon Novarro was silent film royalty, the Latin lover whose striking appearance and charismatic screen presence made him one of MGM's most valuable assets during the 1920s. As the star of epics like Ben-Hur, 1925, Novarro achieved international fame and adoration that placed him among the era's most celebrated leading men. Unlike most surgical deaths, where medical procedures themselves represent the primary cause, Novarro's case involved emergency medical intervention following violence, surgical attempts to address catastrophic injuries inflicted during a brutal home invasion that proved beyond medical remedy. Died in 1968, age 69, notes crime historian James Morrison. Novarro's death resulted primarily from a vicious assault rather than surgical error, but the failed emergency procedures represent a significant aspect of his final hours. After being discovered brutally beaten in his Hollywood Hills home, medical teams attempted desperate interventions that proved insufficient given the severity of his injuries. The circumstances leading to Novarro's fatal injuries reflect both personal vulnerability and the tragic consequences of the closeted existence Hollywood forced upon gay performers. On October 30th, 1968, Novarro invited brothers Paul and Tom Ferguson, ages 22 and 17, to his home. The brothers had targeted Novarro based on false rumors that he kept large sums of cash in his house. The resulting assault was exceptionally brutal. The brothers tortured Novarro for information about money that largely didn't exist, inflicting devastating injuries, including severe head trauma and asphyxiation. When Novarro was discovered the following day, emergency medical services initiated life-saving measures that continued at the hospital. Victim of a brutal home invasion, some sources claim emergency surgery failed due to severe internal trauma, Morrison explains. The surgical team attempted to address internal bleeding and other critical injuries, but the combination of Novarro's age, the severity of his injuries, and the time elapsed between injury and treatment created circumstances beyond medical remedy. The surgical efforts to save Novarro represent appropriate emergency measures undertaken by qualified personnel facing extraordinary challenges. These procedures failed not through error, but due to the overwhelming nature of the injuries themselves. Injuries so severe they would have challenged medical intervention even under optimal circumstances. Novarro's case illuminates the particularly vulnerable position of gay men during Hollywood's golden age, how the industry's demand for carefully managed heterosexual images forced many performers into isolated and sometimes risky personal lives. Having maintained the public fiction of heterosexuality throughout his career to protect his professional standing, Navarro's final vulnerability stemmed partly from the secretive existence imposed by Hollywood's intolerance. He didn't die in bed. He died trying to be put back together. This captures both the violence that precipitated Navarro's final medical interventions and the futility of surgical efforts to address injuries inflicted with such devastating intent. The circumstances of Navarro's death created a particularly jarring contrast with the heroic, powerful characters he had portrayed during his career peak. The gap between his screen invincibility and actual vulnerability in his final moments, highlighting the cruel distinction between Hollywood's manufactured realities and the actual fragility of human existence. This disconnect between Navarro's screen persona and the circumstances of his death creates a particularly poignant chapter in Hollywood's history, a reminder of both the industry's capacity to create transcendent images and its failure to protect the actual human beings who created those images. The Beauty's Burden, Marie McDonald. Marie McDonald embodied a particular type of Hollywood stardom, the performer whose fame rested almost exclusively on physical appearance rather than acting range or artistic achievement. Dubbed the Body by studio publicists, McDonald found herself marketed primarily for her physical attributes, creating a career defined by her appearance rather than her talent. This emphasis on physical perfection created specific vulnerabilities that potentially contributed to her death under mysterious circumstances. Circumstances that some accounts connect to cosmetic surgical procedures, though official records cite different causes. Died in 1965, age 42, notes entertainment historian Margaret Collins. McDonald's death was officially attributed to drug overdose, but alternative accounts have persistently connected her final moments to cosmetic procedures, creating one of Hollywood's enduring medical mysteries. McDonald's career established patterns that would ultimately contribute to her vulnerability. After winning beauty contests and working as a model, she secured contracts with major studios, appearing in films that primarily showcased her physical attributes rather than developing her acting abilities. This emphasis on appearance created both professional pressure to maintain physical perfection and a personal identity deeply connected to external validation of her beauty. Throughout her career, McDonald experienced numerous personal difficulties, including 7 marriages, substance abuse issues, and a possibly staged kidnapping incident that damaged her already precarious professional standing. These challenges reflected the psychological strain of a career built almost exclusively on physical appearance without development of more sustainable professional skills. As McDonald aged and her career opportunities diminished, the pressure to maintain the physical appearance that had defined her professional value likely intensified, creating circumstances where risky cosmetic interventions might have seemed necessary despite potential dangers. Officially ruled an overdose, but some claim she died during a plastic surgery procedure, Collins continues. The conflicting accounts reflect both the ambiguity surrounding her final hours and the different interests served by alternative explanations. An overdose narrative aligned with McDonald's publicly known substance issues, while surgical complications would raise questions about medical judgment and potentially create liability concerns. The mystery deepened with the circumstances surrounding the discovery of McDonald's body, which some accounts describe as staged to suggest an overdose rather than reflecting her actual final moments. These allegations, while unproven, reflect the awareness that Hollywood deaths often involved image management extending beyond the star's lifetime, protecting both medical providers and the industry's broader interests. Her death was mysterious, and her body was found under suspicious circumstances, notes Collins. According to some accounts, there were indications that her body had been moved after death, suggesting possible attempts to obscure the actual circumstances of her passing. The persistence of alternative explanations regarding McDonald's death speaks to broader understanding of Hollywood's beauty demands and the extreme measures sometimes employed to meet them. For a star whose entire value proposition centered on physical appearance, the possibility of death during procedures aimed at maintaining that appearance carries symbolic resonance that transcends factual uncertainty. She built her career on beauty and may have died trying to keep it. This captures both the central contradiction of careers built on physical attributes, their inherent temporary nature in conflict with Hollywood's demand for perpetual perfection, and the potentially fatal consequences when this contradiction leads to increasingly desperate measures. McDonald's case illuminates the particular vulnerability of performers marketed primarily for physical attributes rather than developed talent, the way such marketing creates careers with built-in expiration dates unless stars can successfully transition to roles less dependent on physical perfection.
I've ever been so blue.
The final performance, Eddie Fisher. Eddie Fisher represented a different category of celebrity than many Golden Age Hollywood stars, achieving his primary fame through music rather than film, though his career eventually expanded to include television and movies. As one of America's most successful vocalists during the 1950s, Fisher's smooth tenor voice earned him numerous hit records and established him as a heartthrob for a generation of music fans. Fisher's later life included high-profile marriages to actresses Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor, with his personal life often overshadowing his professional achievements, particularly after Taylor left him for Richard Burton in what became one of Hollywood's most notorious scandals. His death following hip surgery complications in 2010 represents the medical realities of advanced age rather than more sensational circumstances, the routine risks of necessary procedures rather than questionable judgment or extraordinary error. Died in 2010, age 82, notes medical historian Dr. Robert Stevens. Fisher's death followed hip surgery, a common procedure for patients in his age group addressing mobility and quality of life issues. While the surgery itself appears to have been technically successful, his recovery was complicated by factors related to his age and overall health. The hip surgery that preceded Fisher's death represented appropriate medical intervention rather than questionable elective procedure, addressing legitimate quality of life concerns for an elderly patient rather than cosmetic considerations. The complications that developed reflected common risks for surgical patients of advanced age rather than error or negligence. Had hip surgery, but died due to complications, Stevens continues. These complications, while connected to the surgical procedure, reflect the reality that any surgical intervention carries increased risk for elderly patients, whose reduced physiological reserves and healing capacity create vulnerability even when procedures are performed perfectly. Fisher's surgical death illuminates the medical realities that eventually affect all patients who live to advanced age. The increasing necessity of interventions to address quality of life issues, combined with the simultaneously increasing risks those same interventions carry for aging bodies. His access to high-quality medical care provided advantages over average patients, but could not fundamentally alter the biological limitations that affect all humans in their 9th decade. The Man Who Sang to America faded out under anesthesia. This captures both Fisher's primary claim to fame, the voice that once charmed millions, and the relatively gentle end that followed appropriate medical care, contrasting with more dramatic or scandalous Hollywood deaths. What makes Fisher's case noteworthy isn't extraordinary circumstances, but its very ordinariness, the way it represents the common medical realities awaiting those fortunate enough to reach advanced age. After a life marked by dramatic personal controversies and public scandals, Fisher's end came through the same medical pathways that await countless non-famous individuals of similar age. This ordinary medical conclusion creates its own poignant contrast with Fisher's extraordinary early life, the gap between the young singer, whose voice captivated millions, and the elderly patient facing routine surgical risks, highlighting the universal journey from youthful exceptionalism to the common vulnerabilities of age.
Your coffee in the morning and kisses.
Routine tragedy, Constance Bennett. Constance Bennett epitomized Hollywood sophistication, the elegant, articulate leading lady whose performances in films like Topper, 1937, established her as one of the industry's most polished performers. With her patrician-bearing, refined beauty and remarkable business acumen, Bennett created a screen persona of effortless sophistication that made her one of the highest-paid actresses of the early 1930s. Unlike stars whose deaths involved questionable cosmetic procedures or high-risk interventions, Bennett's passing resulted from catastrophic complications during routine dental work, a medical misfortune that could affect anyone regardless of fame or privilege. Died in 1965, age 60, notes medical historian Dr. Robert Stevens. Bennett's death began with a routine dental procedure, the kind of minor medical intervention millions undergo without incident. The extraordinary complication that developed represents medical misfortune rather than error, a rare but recognized risk that can occur even with perfect care. The cascade of events leading to Bennett's death started unexpectedly during what should have been unremarkable dental treatment. Without warning, she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, a catastrophic neurological event that immediately transformed routine care into medical emergency. Collapse during a dental procedure, suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, Stevens explains. This type of event, while statistically rare, can occur without warning even in patients without known risk factors. The hemorrhage wasn't caused by dental error but represented coincidental timing of a medical emergency that might have happened anywhere. Medical personnel responded appropriately to this sudden crisis, quickly transitioning from dental procedure to emergency protocols and arranging immediate transfer to hospital facilities equipped to address the life-threatening situation. Rushed to surgery, died on the operating table, continues Stevens. The surgical intervention was appropriate and necessary given the hemorrhage, but the severity of the neurological event exceeded medical remedy despite appropriate care. The surgical team attempted to address the bleeding and pressure on her brain, but the initial event had caused irreversible damage. Bennett's case illuminates the element of random chance that exists in even the most controlled medical environments. The possibility of catastrophic events occurring without warning during procedures that millions of patients undergo routinely without incident. Unlike deaths resulting from questionable judgment or clear error, her passing resulted from statistical misfortune rather than identifiable mistake. She went in for a routine procedure and never came out. This captures the jarring unexpectedness of Bennett's death, the transformation of mundane medical care into life-ending crisis without warning or clear causation. What makes Bennett's case particularly notable is its deviation from more typical patterns of celebrity medical misfortune, the absence of questionable cosmetic motivation or special treatment. Her death could have happened to any dental patient, regardless of fame or resources, representing the democratic nature of certain medical risks that affect all humans, regardless of status or privilege. This random quality creates its own poignant contrast with Bennett's carefully constructed screen persona, the gap between her characters' seemingly effortless control over their circumstances and the ultimate uncontrollability of biological reality. The star who projected sophisticated command in her performances ultimately experienced the same random vulnerability as any other patient.
Would you be shocked if I put on something more comfortable?
The delayed intervention, Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, the platinum-haired sex symbol whose combination of overt sexuality and comedic talent created a revolutionary screen persona. As one of MGM's most valuable stars during the early 1930s, Harlow established a new paradigm for female sexuality on screen, while showing unexpected depth as an actress. Her shocking death at just 26 represents one of Hollywood's most tragic premature losses, a case where potentially treatable medical conditions progressed to fatal stages through a combination of misdiagnosis, delayed intervention, and the limitations of 1930s medicine. Died in 1937, age 26, notes medical historian Dr. Robert Stevens. Harlow's death resulted primarily from kidney failure, but her final decline included preparation for emergency surgery that came too late. Modern medical analysis suggests earlier diagnosis and intervention might have created very different outcomes for one of Hollywood's brightest young stars. The medical issues that eventually claimed Harlow's life began developing weeks before her death, with symptoms including fatigue, nausea, abdominal pain, and fluid retention. These indicators of serious kidney dysfunction were initially misdiagnosed by her physician as a gallbladder infection or influenza, delaying appropriate treatment during a critical window when intervention might have been effective. By the time the severity of her condition was recognized, Harlow's kidney function had deteriorated to life-threatening levels, with uremic poisoning affecting multiple organ systems. This recognition finally triggered plans for emergency surgical intervention, though modern medical understanding suggests the window for effective treatment had likely already closed. Suffered kidney failure, but was being prepped for emergency surgery, Stevens explains. The planned surgery represented appropriate but belated recognition of her critical condition. While surgical intervention was the correct approach at that point, her condition had already progressed beyond what 1930s medicine could effectively address. The final hours of Harlow's life included being prepared for this emergency surgery that never occurred, her condition deteriorating so rapidly that she lost consciousness before the procedure could begin. This represents a particularly poignant aspect of her case, the recognition of necessary intervention coming too late to implement. Collapsed before they could operate, never regained consciousness, notes Stevens. This sequence highlights both the limitations of 1930s diagnostic medicine and the fatal consequences of delayed intervention for conditions that modern medicine might have successfully treated. Without antibiotics, dialysis, or modern surgical techniques, even a correctly diagnosed kidney infection presented almost insurmountable challenges. Modern medical analysis suggests Harlow likely suffered from kidney disease exacerbated by inappropriate treatments common in the era, including crash diets, questionable tonics, and possibly harmful medications. The absence of antibiotics to address infections that may have triggered her kidney failure represents a critical limitation. Treatment options that might save similar patients today simply didn't exist in 1937. They waited too long, and Hollywood lost its first blonde bombshell. This captures both the preventable nature of Harlow's death by modern standards and the devastating loss her passing represented for both the film industry and her millions of fans worldwide. What makes Harlow's case especially significant is how it illuminates the evolution of medical knowledge and practice, the way conditions that once proved fatal despite the best available care can now be routinely treated with appropriate intervention. Her death at 26 from what was likely pyelonephritis, kidney infection, represents not medical error by contemporary standards, but the limitations of an entire era's medical understanding and treatment options.